Hello everyone, so I'm going to be going over Diagnosis and Correction of Reading Problems by Daryl Morris. This is a textbook that I'm going over in one of my other classes, and I thought it would be a great professional resource just because there's so many things in it that I didn't know before, and I've just been learning so much from it. So those are going to be my focus areas, the things that stood out to me the most, and the things that I believe a teacher, a literacy coach, or a reading specialist can use. Okay, so my focus areas are going to be the history of informal reading diagnosis, administering an informal reading diagnosis, interpretation of reading scores, and the parent interview. So before this, I didn't even know what an informal reading diagnosis was. Definitely didn't know how to administer one, didn't know how to read the scores, and a parent interview in regards to this was also something that I was not aware of. So these are the areas I'm going to be focusing on. Let's go ahead and get started with the history of the informal reading diagnosis. So this has been around for about 60 years. It's been around for about 60 years. The first isolated word recognition test that was done in 1932 was eventually changed 5 years later, or added to 5 years later. And it became a test that was assessing immediate word recognition. So in 1932, it was just, oh, do you recognize this word? There was no time limit on word recognition. But 5 years later, they created something that would test the immediate word recognition. And this is important for things like fluency in reading. So it makes sense. Is a child having to decode a word as they're reading, or is it automatically known by them? Okay, so that's just a little brief history, barely even a history really, but there you go. So administering an informal reading diagnostics test. The test is broken down into 4 parts: word recognition, oral reading, silent reading, and spelling. And so the first part that we start with is the flash presentation, which is that word recognition that I was talking about. The test administrator basically displays a word for half a second, and in this half a second, the child is either going to recognize the word and say it or not. And if they're not able to recognize the word is then revealed again in an untimed setting. So if I have the word cat written down, I'll have 2 index cards over it, and I move my first index card up, and I move the bottom index card back up, covering the word again. So this is supposed to take half a second, theoretically. And if the child doesn't know that word, I reveal the word completely and let them read it, basically, and see if they recognize it. And so, after completing the list of words, if 50% of the words were successfully recognized, then you move on to the next level. And so, it starts out at pre-primer, then it goes to primer, and then it goes up. I think the last part I saw in the book, like the word list, was like 8th grade or something. It may go up more. I'm not completely sure on that. So you start out with this flash presentation, and from the flash presentation you go on to the oral reading. Okay, and so it's at the oral reading, you're not starting from scratch again, but you're starting from the highest grade level that the child received a score of 80% or more. And so if I was administering the flash presentation and a child's highest grade or of 80 or above was at 3rd grade reading level, I would then begin my did I say that right? I may have not said that right. 80% at the flash presentation. So if at the flash presentation their highest grade level was 3rd grade, at the oral presentation, which is the next assessment, I would start at the 3rd grade reading level. So that means that I would begin with a 3rd grade reading level passage. And they would read it out loud, and I would be timing how long it takes them to read it. And followed by this would be some comprehension questions. Okay? And next we go to in the interpretation of the reading scores. And so, I skipped over something. So that's done with the oral reading portion. The same thing is going to be done with the silent reading portion. So now the child's going to read the passage silently. I'm timing them again as well. And the timing is for me to determine their reading rate, which is important for fluency and different things like that as well. Where was I? Okay, so yeah, I time it for the silent reading portion and have comprehension questions after that as well. And then after the silent reading portion is the spelling. So I have a list of words and keep going level by level as the child, as appropriate, and the child is spelling the words off of this list. Okay, so now the interpretation of the reading scores. And so the whole purpose of these tests, the word recognition, the oral and silent reading, and the spelling, is to determine the proper instructional level for a child. And so we have the independent level, the instructional level, and the frustration level. So at the independent level, a child can read by themselves. They could read, it says here that it's appropriate for pleasure reading. Okay, so they don't need any help at this level. And then the instructional level is appropriate for teacher-guided reading. So this is something that would be used in the classroom. And, if there are any further assignments, a child can use the instructional reading level at home as well. And then we have the frustration level, where it's not working out. It's too difficult, basically, to be helpful. It's way too challenging to improve the child's reading ability. It's just frustrating, as the level says. Okay, and so the breakdown of the scores are here. So at these percentages, like if a child scores 90 to 100% for word recognition, they're at the independent level, and so on and so forth for instructional and frustration. And it goes, I obviously couldn't go into great detail in this presentation because it's only 10 minutes, but the book goes over how you break down these scores. So the points that are being taken off, like for the word recognition, if the child hesitates in that half a second, that's a way that points could be deducted. If they mispronounce the word, so if the word is shout and they pronounce it shoot, those are points off, or if they don't know the word at all. And so it goes over, what points to take off and how to calculate it to get these percentages. Very, very easy to understand. They give examples and they have case studies and different things like that. Okay, so it goes on to the oral reading accuracy, the different percentages there. Again, the book breaks it down. And you have case studies, and something I found really interesting about the case studies, it went from like, oh, this is really easy, like determining what instructional level what their independent level was and frustration level. It's really easy determining that. Like, those were the beginning case studies. As the case studies went on, they became a little more difficult to interpret. And so that was really good. They did that on purpose. They're like, not every assessment is going to be so cookie cutter to where it's easy to say, oh, this is what the child's instructional level is. And so that was just really cool for me to see that. And then they had the parent interview. So the importance of the parent interview is the assessment, it'll tell you certain things, but the parent interview really gives you a clear picture of what a child's ability is, because obviously they're their parents, so they know their history. They know when they started to notice different things that may have been telling of some type of problem. Parents know those milestones, those markers, like, oh, my child wasn't walking, they were a little delayed at this, and different things that come out in the interview that just give you more insight to what can be going on, if there's more to the story than just a reading disability or a problem. And so it goes over the topics of the interview: developmental history, personality, like what they like and don't like, position in the family, are they a firstborn or a lastborn, family history. So that's also important because in one of the case studies they gave for the parent interview portion, we had a child that was struggling in the classroom, had their parents come in, and the father was a professor and the mom was a nurse, and they were just going over the interview, and they found out that the father throughout high school struggled with reading and learning in general, and throughout high school he was just a below average student, which is very cool in itself because he went on to be a professor, so I love that part. But that was crucial information because they determined that that was probably something that the child inherited from their father, because reading disabilities, like strong reading disabilities, are hereditary. And so that's something that you may find out from family history, or like in this case, the father, talking about their educational history as well. And so that's really cool. Another example that was really informative for the parent interview was there was a child who was going through tutoring sessions and was just having different outbursts. And in the parent interview, they learned that 2 years prior, the child had been in a car accident where they lost their twin. And the father who was driving was felt so guilty about it, since he was the one driving, and he left the family. And so obviously the trauma of that is extremely hard, and can play into a child's education and their behavior. And so when this was found out in the parent interview, the reading specialist was able to have more patience working with the child whenever, they would have outbursts. And again, it just gives you a clear picture of what may be going on, because, without knowing this piece of information, different things can be assumed, whether it's ADHD or something like that. And it's like, no, there's something going on in the home that may be causing this. And so that was just a very interesting case study for me. And so that is it. I didn't break things down into great detail, but the book really does go over the scoring and how you administer the test. And for the parent interview section, it also has questions that you can ask in the interview. So it's like already done for you, like potential questions. And so I hope that was helpful. The book has 9 chapters. It's not super long. Textbook rather has 9 chapters. It's not super long, and just helpful. Very good tool for a beginner teacher or a veteran teacher, in my point of view anyway. So hope that was helpful. Thank you.